Hey everyone, Curse Deck Builder here with one more bonus Atraxa deck, one more bonus Atraxa Grand Unifier Flicker deck for the day. I got a message from Dakota B who said that after seeing the first video of the day, they sent me this deck, not knowing that I already had another Atraxa Grand Unifier Blink deck on the list, and isn't it a funny coincidence that we're seeing two today? I also heard that my last video's volume wasn't as good, so might as well give Atraxa another shot. So this deck from Dakota B says, I need to cut down on cards, fix my mana curve, more ramp, and better decision with the card types and amounts of cards each type. I took out lands and figured I'd add those last, but yeah, I need those as well, lol. Yes, this deck does not have any lands at the moment, which is the direction one of the things that we're going to talk about a little bit. Do you have any deck building restrictions? They say no budget, plan on proxying the deck. But I do want the deck to be based around ETBs and blink strategy / value, with the win condition being infinite blink or drawing out the deck with a commander. I'm not the best with knowledge of the card pool in this game as I originally play Yu-Gi-Oh! I want it to be powerful but not CEDH. I want a good amount of ramp as well. Feel free to take out whatever you think is necessary and add better staples, etc. Some cards I like to keep in are Abdel Adrian, Yorion, Agent of Treachery, Eerie Ultimatum, Oko, and Animatu. Also, I realize there's a lot of cards that can double ETB triggers, but I'd prefer just to blink instead. I don't mind playing a few cards of that effect, maybe like 3 or 4. Thank you so much for your deck list, Dakota B. I also really appreciate the amount of detail that you've put into the form because it does help us get into a direction a lot easier. So as always, right off the top, this deck list is in the video description below so that you can open it up while I take a look and you can see what changes you would make, what you would suggest, and maybe you'll think that they should add some lands. But that's okay. We're going to start looking at this as a draft. This is a pretty open draft because, as you might see, the deck has 136 cards and no lands. So this is a kind of list that we're looking to make about 60-ish cuts just to start it to be able to be on the way to being a deck. Now this isn't a problem. I don't want people to think that they can't send me lists like this. I actually kind of prefer this because it tells me clearly what level of the deck building process we're at, right? Dakota B has an idea and they've made a collection of cards that work towards those ideas, and they're going to start by cutting them down. I think this is a great way to start a commander deck. It might be extra work to put this list together only to toss a bunch of cards out, but I don't think it's a problem. I think it's a great way to see what you have to work with and narrow the pool down. It also gives you a great idea of the kind of options you have in a deck. So with that in mind, and considering there's 205 additional cards that you've been considering, I am going to theme this video around the cards and strategies that I think could or should be cut out of here, and where the direction of the deck can go into. We're too early to start suggesting cards. You don't really need card suggestions. You have more than enough. I'll probably still suggest a few here and there, but right now our main idea is to get the shape of the deck. With that in mind, though we just described Atraxa Grand Unifier recently, let's quickly go over what she does. She's a 7-mana angel with a bunch of, combat abilities that we don't care about. We want her because when she enters the battlefield, you reveal the top 10 cards of your deck. You look for any number of cards with different types. In this deck, that would be battles, invasions, creatures, sorceries, instants, artifacts, enchantments, and 1-day lands. And for each type, you will take that card and put it into your hand. This is very, very powerful, and it can really swing the game as a big draw spell and a big selection spell. Now, something right off the bat that we can see is this deck list that was created is very different from the deck list we saw in the previous video. This deck has a much higher power level, and you can tell that by the inclusion of certain cards. Now, I want to be clear, a higher power level does not mean better. It just means aiming the deck to be something else, usually to match with a different kind of play group. But in this deck, we can see that there's suggestions for cards like Pact of Negation, which is a 0 mana counterspell. Same with Swan Song, which is a 1 mana counterspell. Fierce Guardianship, Force of Will, and I'm sure Force of Negation, there it is, all together to be free counterspells, something we consider to be very strong. Here we also have free mana ramp, 3 cards here that are mana rocks that cost 0, therefore having a very high level of power. We also see tutors at really low mana, vampiric tutors over here, and enchantments like Carpet of Flowers that also represent a lot of ramp. Now, these may or may not be in the final version of the deck, but it's good to address kind of the idea of these cards because Dakota B said that they didn't want CEDH, and as they said they're not very familiar with Magic, a lot of these cards lean towards CEDH. When we go on to lists like very powerful cards, and we start just putting all the powerful cards in, Atraxa herself and the Blink strategy will start losing a bit of its power. And I'll use one more card to make this to show as an example, and that's Esper Sentinel. So Esper Sentinel is a really powerful card. It represents a lot of card draw. It represents the ability to kind of interfere with your opponent's plans if they have to start paying more mana to stop drawing you a card. It's also great with Atraxa because it has 2 card types. It's an artifact and a creature, which means it fits well when you reveal it with Atraxa because you can put it into either pile if you want it. But for all this power, Esper Sentinel fundamentally doesn't work with our game plan, right? It has no enter the battlefield effect, and it has no exit the battlefield effect. You don't gain anything by blinking it. And in addition, the traditional way we make Esper Sentinel stronger is by modifying it. We either give it equipment, we give it an aura, or we give it +1/+1 counters, all of which can boost its power, which makes it a stronger card. Once again, blinking is traditionally antithetic. Wow, I cannot say that word. It's against the idea of those things because attached cards will be unattached and +1/+1 counters will be removed. So, all this to say, I'm not saying to not play Esper Sentinel. I'm just suggesting that when we play Esper Sentinel, you're playing a strong card that isn't on theme. And you should be careful with how many strong cards that aren't on theme you can get away with, right? So let's start taking a look at cards and sections that I think are probably worth considering double checking and deciding whether or not we want to keep. And the first section I want to talk about is these mana dorks, as we call them. These mana dorks and this large collection of mana rocks that we have here, right? So mana dorks are generally very good at generating quick mana. And I know my favorite guy from Muldrotha is still here. Actually, was it Muldrotha? No, it was the previous deck. It was one of the Atraxas, Fabro Elder, is here reminding me that, our creatures can tap for mana, which can power out our cards a lot faster. However, this isn't exactly the strategy that we want in an Atraxa deck. In an Atraxa deck, we want Wood Elves. Wood Elves and the like of these kind of cards will create mana for us when they enter the battlefield, mainly by ramping, by pulling a land out of our deck and putting on the battlefield. Wood Elves can also grab anything that's a forest, so the triomes that you can play, and I'm fairly certain you can play a few, all of which are able to be grabbed by Wood Elves as long as they have a forest. And likewise, you can grab Shocklands, you can grab Original Duels. There's a lot of selection here that you can grab with a Wood Elf. And in addition, every time you blink the Wood Elf, you get the advantage. Whereas something like, let's go back here, something like Noble Hierarch does not give you that advantage. Noble Hierarch is just a small creature. She's great in ramp strategies in maybe one-on-one, but here you want more value. If she gets removed by any means, that value is gone. Whereas if they remove your Wood Elves, you keep the land, which is really important. Likewise, if you blink Noble Hierarch, it doesn't do anything. So I would say nice and easy, doesn't belong here. Likewise, Bloom Tender, likewise Ornithopter of Paradise, even to an extent Dryad of the Elysian Grove. These are ramp and fixing that we don't generally need. I'd rather see Wood Elf effects, Coiling Oracle effects. There is a number of creatures that come into play and put the land directly into play. I would like those. Let's look at a few more. Almost distinguished conjurer also is kind of weird. I haven't seen this before, but immediately I noticed that the perk of playing it is that you gain 1 life each time. I said this in the previous video, but that's not a good thing. That's detrimental because that amount of life probably won't save you. And you're probably already winning if you are gaining any substantial amount of life through this. And finally, it just makes you more annoying. If you gain 15 life and you're already a threat, that 15 life won't matter as 3 of your opponents come down on you. You know, it's a thing that is sometimes difficult for new Magic players to understand. Life gain is seen as a buffer or like a defensive kind of play, but more often than not, all it represents is another kind of resource pool that you're interacting with. Because if you are behind and your opponents are ahead, the difference of having 30 life and 40 life is really negligible because your opponents are attacking you with like 7/7 dragons. They don't care about the extra 10 life. They're gonna defeat you one way or another. Though the one benefit Distinguished Conjurer has is this 5 mana blink effect and tap. I'm not too impressed. That's a lot of mana. It also means that this creature can't be summoning sick, so it needs to have already been on the battlefield for a turn. And you can only use it once. I'm generally unimpressed by this. I wouldn't play this kind of effect even as a backup. Grand Abolisher and Lotho are both very strong cards that are not on theme of Blink effect, so I'm not too interested in that. Um, Looking down here, most of these are pretty good. A lot of these you're going to find are going to be like variants of each other. For example, there's going to be a lot of like Guardian of the Girapur is like Flickerwisp, which is like Restoration Angel. Each of them do something a little different with a few adjustments, and it's important through gameplay for you to figure out which one you want the most. My general opinion is Flickerwisp is the strongest of this because it exiles any permanent, which can be more valuable, whereas the other two can only exile creatures, and I believe this exiles artifacts. That's close. But I do really like. I would say it would be between Flickerwisp and Restoration Angel as the two strongest because Resto has Flash, and that is actually really strong and can save creatures or get extra effects when you want to. Now, I'm not saying you need to cut all three or two. It's just important that there's going to be a lot of redundancy in a deck like this. A lot of the power of a Blink deck comes from two main columns. The first column is good ETBs. The second column is Blinks. There is a lot of redundancy in those piles. So I want you, when you look through this deck, to be really picky about which ones you play, because you shouldn't be playing every single one accessible. Something like Skyclave Apparition is great. This is an ETB that's removal. You're going to find there's a few more of those, like Ravenous Chupacabra. Once again, you're going to have to decide which one you'd rather play and which one is stronger. Whereas things like Soul Herder are always going to be played because they enable the deck by blinking repeatedly. All right, let's keep looking. A lot of these are just generally strong. Hostage Taker is pretty good. I'm a big fan. You have a few clone effects that I think right now I'll talk about. Clone effects are good, but they have some downsides because they themselves are nothing. I know that's silly, but that means you can't play them out on an empty battlefield. And even though it's rare to have an empty battlefield, it isn't rare for there to be a battlefield where you don't have anything and your opponents have creatures you don't want to waste a spark double on. And I like Spark Double the most because it is going to copy. It can copy Atraxa and you can keep it, and I think that's the best one. The rest are okay. I do like down here you're playing Phantasmal Image, which is nice at 2 mana, but I wouldn't play too many. Like Phyrexian Metamorph is okay next to Spark Double, right? So I would cut down. I don't wouldn't play all of them, but I would play one or two. You just need to figure out which ones you're going to play. Timeless Witness is fine. I think Eternal Witness is much better, and I don't know if you really need that many copies of it. It's especially tough because when they eternalize, they become a token, which means you cannot blink Timeless Witness, and at that point you've paid 7 mana anyways. I'm not a big fan of this card. I think you have better options. Enters the battlefield, you take the initiative. This isn't the right one. There's a 3 mana and white one that I don't think you're playing. If you want the initiative, use the 3 mana white creature. Don't use the Undermountain Adventurer. Take though they both have initiative on ETB, so you have the same benefit here. And I don't think you need the mana boost. Your mana should be fine. You're not going from This would give you from 4 to 6, which is nice. But with this deck, I don't think you're going to be having trouble. Like you have so much card draw and ramp that mana dorks aren't particularly good. This is still passable because of the ETB, but it is close, I would say. Peregrine Drake is like the cornerstone of a lot of combos here, so I'm glad it's there. And I believe you're playing Palancron, which works as the second copy. I think that's great. Rune is fine, but Rune is 5 mana to do nothing. Because Rune doesn't allow you to blink. Rune doesn't allow you to blink when Rune doesn't have summoning. Sorry, he has to be non-summoning sick to do his ability. And for 5 mana, that's a long wait. You're gonna play Rune, and then you have to hope to be able to blink something. And even then, the Rune just costs 2 mana to do that. I'm not too impressed. I wouldn't play that. Solitude's good, not as good in one-on-one formats, but still really great. I think that's a fantastic card here. Deadeye Navigator is obviously the combo with Peregrine Drake or Palancron. Agent of Treachery is great. Thought Monitor is weird. I like that it's an artifact creature, and I like nothing else about it. This is a very strange Muldrifter to be playing in this deck. Unless you're going to keep your numbers of artifacts pretty high, I don't think it is worth playing this card. So I would cut that. All right, let's look at sorceries. All the tutors are also cards that I need you to think how interested you are in playing a strong deck. The tutors get really, really good when you want to play strong decks. The closer you get to EDH, the better the tutors are. I would probably keep one. I don't know if I would play, because I see Wishclaw Talismans here, Imperial Seal, Demonic Tutor, and then Vampiric Tutor. That's too many. Unless you're going CEDH, you don't need that many. I would count Neoform, and I would count Eldritch Evolution as other copies of tutors because they do very similar things. So I would cut down to a certain number. I'll leave that to you to decide with the power level of the deck, but you probably don't need to play all of those. Also, all of the mana ramp. Once again, if you're playing creatures that ramp for you, you should play those instead. All of these can be creatures, and you'll be happier where they are. It does reduce the number of sorceries, and it does reduce the amount of hits with Atraxa, but you are a blink deck, and you cannot blink a sorcery, unfortunately. So you're kind of stuck having to cut some of these out. Supreme Verdict's fine. Having a board clear is always really nice. But you have to remember in a deck like this, the board clear is going to hurt you the most because you play to the field the most. You can play some cool stuff by, casting out, where is it? Eerie Interlude, for example, and then board wiping. That's great. You're not always going to be able to do that, so be aware. Time Wipe is a little strange. Time Wipe has kind of a bouncing mechanic to it, but I don't think you want that. It's very rare, I think, that you want to keep a single creature, right? Like your creatures work well in tandem together. And some of your strongest abilities aren't on creatures, such as if I go down to enchantments, we can see teleportation circles right there. And with that in mind, we should also see Thassa's here, right? And Thassa's indestructible, so that's not even a problem. So those two effects are always protected from time wipe anyways. So my question becomes, what are you hoping to bounce, right? Are you going to bounce like an Ewit? Yeah, I guess that's fine, but I don't think it puts you that far ahead. With that in mind, I think just playing a 4 mana board clear, you're probably going to be happier about that. You know, just using you are in the colors that there are a number of different board clears that you have access to. You could just play Day of Judgment or Wrath of God or Damnation in Black. You've got a lot of options, and this feels like a strange one. In fact, I don't even recommend playing this many board clears. I would play 1 to 2 at most. Farewell also feels really weird. I've spoken about this before, but Farewell acts like a boogeyman in the format, but I don't think it's a natural include into every deck. Especially this deck, where one of the main things you want to do, and you've asked me to keep, is Eerie Ultimatum. Well, if you want to keep Eerie Ultimatum, you have to get rid of Farewell, because Farewell is going to exile your entire board, and then Eerie Ultimatum does nothing. And with that in mind, you actually want destroy effects, because once you exile your battlefield, it's not coming back. Moving on to instants, I'm skipping over Seagate because it's great because it's a land. Moving on to instants, once again, one of my first questions is, hey, you're playing a lot of 1 mana instants that are really, really strong. I'd like you to pick which ones you'd like to play because there's a lot of tutors and there's a lot of low mana counter spells, and they might be not that great depending on power level. There's a bit of an inverse relationship with the strength of certain cards and the power of the deck. Like it's hard to explain until you live through it, but Pact of Negation is a fantastic card. It is a strong, strong card. No one ever doubts that. However, when you are playing at a table where the power level is pretty low, Pact of Negation is a terrible card because there's not really targets to hit with it. You know, this is a 5 mana counterspell. That's a lot of mana. And you have to actually pay it the turn after, which is even worse sometimes because then you can't adjust to what has happened in the turn cycle. And if you're playing against opponents that have a lower level of power, more likely than not, what they're using is just generally strong creatures or generally, you know, like strategies that play to the board that are a little clumsy sometimes, and they're just playing bomb after bomb, right? They're not playing like a 1-2 card combo. Like I guess the way to think about it is if you were playing in the mirror, if someone showed up with an Atraxa deck, would you play Pact of Negation against them? I probably wouldn't unless the power level was really high. Because what are they going to do? Counter Atraxa? They'll cast her again. It's not a big problem. And yeah, you can use it on some of the stronger pieces such as Teleportation Circle. But even then, you're not setting them back that far. And you yourself are set back quite a ways away because you've basically given up your next turn to cast this card. I don't know. Those are the things I think about. So apply that same kind of thinking to things like Swan Song, uh, Veil of Summer. You know, Mana Drain can stay because it has a really high ceiling, but Fierce Guardianship, Force of Negation, and Force of Will are very, very strong cards. And I think if you don't want to be CEDH, a lot of these will have to go. The rest of these are pretty standard. I like a lot of them. Void Rend is an okay card. I don't. It's very specific in casting cost, whereas you know Void Rend is just Generous Gift, but worse. Generous Gift is destroy target permanent. They get a 3/3 elephant. Obviously, Beast Within is the green version. Just stronger cards because yeah, you can't counter Void Rend, but Void Rend can't hit lands, and sometimes you need to hit lands. Also, the very complicated casting cost in a 4-color deck already might be a bit tough. But the rest of this looks really good. There are a bunch of cards I would play. I would definitely play Eerie Interlude, Momentary Blanks, Master's End, etc., etc. Rest of these are fine. Artifacts, once again, let's look through. We have a large collection of mana rocks. And okay, you have Decanter of Endless Water and Thought Vessel. Decanter is getting a lot of views these days. I'm not quite sure why people keep looking at this card. This effect isn't that good. Um, I play. I say that with the caveat that I play Thought Vessel myself, and so Thought Vessel says you have no maximum hand size. Not every deck will be discarding from the amount of card draw. This one might, but even then, is that a problem? Um, if you are drawing up to like 15 cards at a time, not having a maximum hand size is really good. If you're drawing up to 9 cards in hand, just discard the 2, right? There's very rarely going to be a set of cards that you want in your hand that are really strong that are more than 7, right? Like if you think about holding up counter magic and having access to your combo, and then maybe having something like Ranger Captain of Eos is really good here, all collectively to show up and say, okay, I can win the game with these cards, right? And so with that in mind, there's only a few of those hands, so something will have to give, right? You could have that hand and you could have Orcish Bowmaster and then you draw Phantasmal Image. Yeah, that's tough. Let's say the other 6 cards are perfect. You have to discard one of those 2. It's a difficult decision. That's Magic, right? You're going to have to make a decision, unfortunately. So I don't really highly value Thought Vessel or Decanter to begin with, but in a deck where you have mana requirements that are important, if you're going to play mana rocks at all, outside of Soul Ring, they should tap for colors. Like, for example, I like the Signets here a lot more than I like the Talismans because they let you switch your mana around in more powerful ways. Because it's one thing to have black or blue, and it's another thing to have black and blue. Once again, though, I will repeat that I don't think you should be playing a lot of mana rocks. These abilities should come from your creatures, if at all able to. There are also a lot of artifact creatures, much like there are a lot of enchantment creatures, and I know of a bunch of artifact creatures that have good enter the battlefield effects, so definitely look into those if you're trying to keep the numbers even. Finally, here we are with Carpet of Flowers, enchantments. These are just fine. I think they're all good. Food Chain, once again, I don't think this is the kind of deck that wants Food Chain, right? The way this works, the way Food Chain works is that you want to combo off by casting a specific card over and over again, because it allows you just to generate infinite mana for creature spells. But that doesn't really work here because you can't do it with Atraxa, and if you have infinite mana, you don't need to cast Atraxa, you don't need Food Chain. So Food Chain doesn't belong here. It's also, once again, a CEDH card, so it doesn't belong here. Guardian Project's fine, I've already said that. Smothering Tithe is fine. The rest are generally fine. I don't think you need this many card draws like Rhystic Study, Mystic Remora, and Black Market Connections. Your commander already kind of does that, so you're generally in the clear there. Finally, looking at battles and planeswalkers, Invasion of Ikoria is fine. The one downside to the invasion is that once you flip it, let's flip it this way, it becomes a creature. You can't blink this creature. Because once you do, every time you flip back to Invasion of Ikoria, X will be 0 because you haven't cast Invasion of Ikoria. And as long as X is 0, unfortunately, the invasion does nothing. It lets you pull like the land creature. What is it? Creature land. Ooh, my spelling is not great today. Land. All right. Dryad Arbor, I believe. Dryad Arbor. It lets you get Dryad Arbor or any 0 mana creature, and Dryad Arbor is fine, but you don't really want to play it, and you don't want to play 0 mana creatures. So Invasion of Ikoria, I agree that maybe think about battles, but don't think about this one. This isn't the one to be. I get its flip side lets you attack and be unblocked with non-human creatures. That's okay. Once again, not where you want to be. Anamatu is great. I have no problems with Anamatu. Oko is fine. Oko is a really, really strong card, but loses a lot of its power in Commander. And don't get me wrong, that's still a lot of power, but doesn't particularly kind of combo with your Commander at all. Oko's just there to kind of be a strong card. So, oh no, Oko is on your list. So I don't take out Oko either. I wasn't sure if Oko was on the list. All right, so that's things to think about while cutting down the deck. Um, I want to really, really briefly look through here, really briefly, for anything that I feel like, oh, yes, I will speak to this. One thing I want to speak to is you said that you don't want to have too many ETB doublers. I would think about playing 1 to 2. You said maximum 3 to 4. I think 1 to 2 is fine. They're the kind of cards that don't often do anything by themselves, but coupled with other blink effects or other ETB effects, they tend to be really strong. I think playing more than 1 or 2 is a mistake unless you want to be at a really high power level and keep all the tutors in. Because with the tutors, that's great. You'll find them. You'll just pull them out of your deck. When you don't have tutors and you pull into the wrong half of your deck by just naturally drawing it, Yarok is cool, but Yarok doesn't do anything, if that makes sense. You play Yarok on an empty field with no other ETBs in hand, or think of a hand that's like Rhystic Study, Smothering Tide, you've got Swan Song. This is all your really strong cards. And then the only creature is Yarok. Yarok does nothing there. He is just there just like a 5 mana, 3/5 Death Touch lifelink, which with cool art for what it's worth. So with that in mind, Yarok-like abilities, I would like just maximum 1 or 2, unless you're playing Mom, because Mother of Machines is really, really, really good because it negates your opponent's ETBs, then that's free. If you can play Mom, play Mom. I recognize you want to play 6 copies of Mom, but that's still good. Toxic Deluge is something I should have said as the board clear of choice. Toxic Deluge and Supreme Verdict are probably the ones you want to play. Looking through here, anything else that really jumps out at me? I'm going to look at the artifacts. Another initiative card, that's why it's there. Those are fine. Nothing really jumps out that needs to be put in from here. And same thing here. Not all of the things are jumping out at me as things I'm feeling like you have to play. So outside of the ones I said, I would start by cutting this list down with some of the suggestions I made. And let's see if we can get it down to like 60 cards so that we can look at it with a land base and move on from there. I hope this was useful. I know we haven't really made a lot of suggestions of the deck and we're more looking at the bare bones of the deck, but I think this is actually a really good way to be deck building, where we're kind of starting with a very generalized idea and something that like I talk about a lot, but I don't know if players think about a lot, is taking the question of what power level I want this deck to be very seriously. It's often thought of as this, outside of CEDH players, because CEDH is very literal in its power level. The rest of decks generally have this idea of put the commander together with your first draft, find out what the power level is, and then build the deck into that power level or higher. We don't usually think about, hey, I want to build this deck. What kind of, should I put it at a lower power level or should I go for a medium power level? Often we start by building the deck and going there. So this is a nice exercise at seeing what the deck has as options and then deeming, like from there, instead of deeming the power level from that, but building the power level from that. As mentioned many times before, just to make sure the idea is across, when a good way to figure out how high you want your power level is to find the cards that are good off theme, specifically ones like Smothering Tide, Rhystic Study, Carpet of Flowers, low mana counterspells, tutors, fast mana and creatures. These are all things that are generally good outside of Atraxa and aren't on theme. The more card slots you use on these cards, the less card slots you're going to have for your blink shenanigans. Remember that. And when you have that in mind, build me the next draft, and then we'll take a look at it and we'll try to solidify the deck even more. I'm really excited to see where this is going. When you do finish the deck, or if anyone has any deck to ever show me, there is a form in the YouTube video description below that you can use to send me the deck list, and we can take a look and make a video about it. And as always, if you like to do the like, comment, subscribe, the YouTube thing, as we all know, it is very, very helpful to me and the channel because it is a small channel and we're getting going. All right. I hope this second look at Atraxa the Grand Unifier today was very helpful. I think it was a little fun. In between these two videos, I took out the cards for my Atraxa deck and I laid them out on the table. So pretty soon, I'll also be taking a look at building this deck. And after which, I guess we can all get together and compare notes. All right. Good luck.